and welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. One quick announcement before I bring on our guests for today. We have our June symposium coming up at the end of the month. Make sure that you use the QR code or the link in the chat to sign up for this event. And with that, we'd like to introduce our guest for today, Chrysanthi Dori, who is the VP of Clinical Informatics Services at Medidata. As you know, we love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any for Chrysanthi during the conversation, use the chat feature or the Q&A, and I'll make sure that we get to it. With that, thank you so much for being here today, Chrysanthi.
It's my pleasure to be here, Nina, and everyone.
I am so excited to learn more about yourself and all of the incredible work that you're doing. So maybe, a place for us to start would be if you could just tell us a little bit more about your early career path and really what sparked your broader interest in the world of clinical informatics.
That's a very interesting question. Actually, my early career began in really deep engineering roles. I was involved building different complex compliance systems, and I was involved building security tools within the cybersecurity arena. Actually, what pulled me into clinical informatics was the realization that the same systems that are thinking to secure data can also optimize patient care, and they can have greater impact to the patient population sitting at the intersection of patients, technology, and in general life sciences. When I saw firsthand how isolated and integrated, how poorly actually integrated tech slows down trials and limited access within legacy siloed systems, I knew that we needed better bridges between data and decisions in healthcare.
What an incredible call to action to really be able to see that, firsthand. Would love to learn a little bit more around, are there any particular experiences or mentors that kind of helped transition you into this role?
Yeah, actually there were significant mentors. On the CRO and on the pharma side, I had mentors who really pushed me to think beyond the code, beyond the technical systems, and be able to envision a broader ecosystem where we can have clinical impact. So I worked with electronic clinical outcome assessments, with medical devices, with electronic health records. And that type of data shifted my mindset. I shifted from being a builder to a systems leader. And that's when I started operating at the intersection of innovation, regulation, and patient outcomes.
I love that, how you say from kind of builder to really being able to think more holistically. And so, Chrysanthi, when you are not the VP of Clinical Informatics in this huge, incredible role, I also know that you have launched or are in the process of launching Kate. I have a little bit of a preview, but would love if you could share with everyone a little bit more about Kate and the inspiration behind that.
Sure, I'm so happy to actually announce the Center of AI for Testing and Evidence, and that is Kate. And the reason we created Kate, I'm the co-founder actually of Kate with Stan Kaknowski. And the reason is we witnessed deploying AI in healthcare and the challenges that we have with the infrastructure to test it. We are not doing the same thing as we do when we try to have FDA approval for drugs or devices, right? We talk about software as a medical device. We don't have the current infrastructure. We saw it again and again in life sciences within technology companies. So we saw a massive gap between the promise of AI and the lack of standards for safety, for fairness, for clinical relevance. So Kate aims to be that bridge to validate AI tools before they are used in high-stakes environments.
Wow, what an incredible mission. I feel like all of us have heard and seen AI in all of these different healthcare settings, all of these different applications. So to be able to have kind of this core mission behind it, that's phenomenal. Can you share a little bit more about some of the gaps that you've seen when it comes to AI validation? I know one of the ones that you were speaking of was that there just isn't kind of a process that there is for something like FDA approval. Are there any other gaps that you have seen in your career that have inspired Kate?
My role and what I have seen in my experience is always to embed clinical quality and regulatory alignment into the innovation cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that trust that Kate aims to be in early stages, it must be engineered. It's not enough to build good AI. Stakeholders need to see how it is tested, who it was tested on, how it behaves over time.
Right.
Kate teaches us that validation is not a checkbox. It is a continuous, transparent process. And
Mm.
so we are entering an era where real world performance will be just as important as the initial validation. So
Right.
if you see, evidence won't come only from the lab, it will come from the live data, the patient diversity, and the post market monitoring. So Kate is built for that shift.
That is phenomenal. And I think on that note, can you tell us a little bit more around how do you see Kate engaging with industry stakeholders, regulators, all of that to kind of build and establish that trust, right? Those trusted standards that you were speaking of.
That's a very good question, actually, because Kate aims to be the collaboration and the catalyst.
Mm,
What do I mean? I mean, we aim to co-create
mhm,
with regulators and industry stakeholders to be able to establish trusted standards for AI testing. So we had been involved with regulators, payers, and providers in the design of our validation frameworks,
oh, wow.
um, not just reviewing them. And the
Mhm,
proactive engagement is what will give Kate its credibility and its adoption momentum.
mhm. That's phenomenal. And I know Kate is still kind of in the earlier stages, so very much the startup founder energy. Would love if you could share with us, what have been some of important lessons, milestones, learnings that you've learned while leading Kate kind of in the earlier stage.
Yeah, so look, when I look at emerging technologies or AI capabilities that transform clinical trials and patient outcomes, for example, we are looking at different platforms, right? For
Mhm,
example, adaptive protocol platforms, digital protocol design, to be able to create clinical design much more quicker and much more efficient. So we look at generative AI for automating workflows and creating efficiencies within the industry. We are looking at all the different tools that are coming in the market to be able, AI tools, to be able to rank them appropriately, to do third-party audits for bias, to be able to make sure that we have the right data and that they achieve the right efficiencies we are looking for. And we are looking at the right KPIs to be able to monitor them, track them, and line them up with other AI tools. At the
mhm,
same time, we are looking at the needs in the industry, right?
right.
There are startups that they are looking to be able to have the right tools to scale up very quickly without having to do all the investment that it's required. Well, here is Kate. Kate can have certified tools and the right platforms and the right learnings associated to be able to inform all the stakeholders of why one tool is better than another in certain use cases.
It's like a phenomenal little toolkit almost. I love it.
Yes. And one major challenge is actually hidden bias, right? There are
Mm,
algorithms that perform well overall, but fail in underserved populations. I
wow.
remember once what shaped actually my career was once I was in a bioinformatics seminar and someone mentioned that the mammograms that we do currently on the West serves Western women. And if you were trying to do the same diagnostics in India, it wouldn't be able to diagnose breast cancer the way it does effectively here. And I always remember that. So always now Kate is actually built to be able to address some of these ethical challenges, right? What algorithms perform well overall, and what are the underserved populations? So we are thinking how we run equity audits by default. So every AI tool we evaluate should be able to pass fairness thresholds across race, gender, age, and language groups.
That's I was just going to ask you around some of the ethical kind of concerns, because I feel like we hear that a lot when we think about, or when we talk about AI, the biases. But the story that you mentioned with the mammograms, I didn't even know that. That's so interesting, and really, I guess, speaks to the level of discernment that's needed with AI.
Yes, and if you see, I know institutions here now that they're having these diagnostic tools. They're looking at AI, they're looking at images, they're looking at the captures from imaging, and they are able to look at calcifications for breast cancer early, to be able to diagnose it early for estrogen and progesterone positive. And this is actually happening with 95% accuracy currently. So AI can really bring many blessings, but under validation and testing and bias, non-bias.
Wow. I actually, I know we saved questions for the end, but as we were talking about some of the ethical considerations, there were so many great questions and comments. I think everyone is so interested in this particular area. One of the questions that we have from our audience member is if you could please expand on Turner's thresholds.
Oh, we have what do you mean? Can you clarify again?
Yeah, you were kind of speaking of how AI, when you kind of think through the equity audits and how it needs to make sure that it's kind of validating these thresholds, age, gender, language, et cetera. And I think the question was to expand a little bit more on some of the thresholds that you use for those equity audits.
Yeah, we have to look at accuracy in different clusters based on different populations and groups, right? Racial groups, ages, and all of that. So when we are looking at the patient population, we have to have the right data collection representing all the different groups. And more be able to anonymize those data and be able to do our data engineering and our data science to create and use different methodologies to be able to create the right clusters and look at them actually from the perspective of the different subpopulations. Do we have all the data represented into the patient's data? When we look at it, is the algorithm performing with accuracy and fallback rate? Actually, what is the fallback rate? What is the risk score? And be able to see the underrepresented populations and overfitting for certain populations versus others.
That's super helpful. I think this probably leads into another question that we have from the audience. I think, we see and we hear a lot around the lack of women's health data. Knowing that AI is knowing that AI is really trained on existing data, and we just don't see as much when it comes to women's health. Is that kind of an area that you see where there's a big gap, or are you still able to find and kind of get access to a lot of women's health specific data?
This is a very good question. And there are consortiums that they provide data. So there are patient registries, right? Patient registries for different populations and different genders. There are different clinical studies for women and in clinical trials. But this is a serious concern. And if we see there are consortiums that we can get data. So for example, we know we have the UK biomarkers and other areas. And another area of being able to have data is data through medical devices. If you see, now we have medical device collection, and there are many clinical trials that are utilizing medically validated devices. And from there, we can really get acceleration, atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, heart rate variability, sleep, gait, for different actually situations, for different therapeutic areas. But yes, of course, we're still starving for data, but Kate aims to be able, as I mentioned, to create a bridge within this disparity and collaborate with sponsors, with startups, with payers, and with regulators, and be able to access data, collect data, access data, but at the same time create the anonymity that serves the patient's privacy. So compliance and security, it's very important to us.
Mm-hmm. And I like how you were kind of speaking to, all of the places that you could get the data and just the partnership, right, that comes with the work that you're doing and how that is seems so fundamental.
Yes.
Wow.
And where I work on currently, we collect data, we do 75% of the global clinical trials. So we have data collection from everywhere. We have electronic health record data. We have data from medically validated devices through our central cloud. We have lab data. We have all the clinical trial data, and we use real anonymization and the identification to be able to protect HIPAA compliance, GCP, GDPR, and all of that. And we are doing a lot of data engineering and data science to be able to predict patient outcomes and progression of disease.
Wow. And you were just kind of thinking through really what you were saying about the global or so much of the clinical trials and kind of that work. I did not know that. And I mean, that's incredible because it really speaks to the global impact. For you, how do you envision, Kate, kind of impacting global healthcare innovation, AI adoption, all of those things kind of in, the near future?
Actually, I think AI will be in the end an augmented intelligence, right? That sits in my mind besides every clinician, summarizing, predicting, and personalizing. So to me, Kate, I wanted to become the status quo, similar to what we have with good clinical practices in clinical trials, something that has a standardized framework and a set of validation frameworks globally, understand all the regulatory concerns, and be able to adhere to all these regulatory principles and tap into the different frameworks such as NIST or other frameworks, and do third-party auditing in those algorithms and be able to solve real problems. And in reality, I see a global collaboration between clinicians, between data scientists, data engineers, regulators, payers, in a way of collaborating with each other and influence actually the regulatory back. So to me, Kate will play a very important role, that it will be global and it will be able to educate and map regulatory expectations. It will be tested for clinical relevance, and it will be structured to scale without compromising data integrity.
Wow. That's an incredible mission. And I am so curious, are there any examples that you can share, any specific, like real world examples of how Kate has been used to kind of influence the improvement or the approval process for AI healthcare, or is it still a little bit too early?
Kate actually is a new initiative, but we have access all over the world, to data scientists, data engineers. We have a lot of collaboration with a lot of prospective founders within Kate, where they represent technology and they represent the sponsor side, the payer side. And we had a lot of, we can tap into a lot of different clinical trials that had been conducted already with medical devices to be able to show clinical validity and clinical utility, learn lessons from that, and be able to apply those lessons in a scalable infrastructure and add on it all the different generative AI tools for workflow automation and different business use case, and collaborate with the sponsors and startups to augment those use cases and develop the algorithms that are required for best of fit purpose.
I love that. One of the questions that we have from the audience is, what the standards that you're creating for Kate. If you could share a little bit more on the use cases for that. Is that kind of more for disease treatment, patient outcomes, or are you also looking at it for preventative care types of tech solutions too?
Yeah, it's a very loaded question. Because in reality, I wish and I envision that AI will help us to move from a reactive care to preventative care and proactive care. Instead of being patients, being the beginning in charge of our health and be able proactively to help ourselves rather than reactively as patients. But in reality, we are looking to be able to serve within the clinical trial population, to be able to predict diseases and progression of disease and clinical outcomes. But at the same time, there is no reason that we wouldn't be able to help proactively through medical device collection of data, to be able to show clinical utility and clinical validity, be able to see how the population who is doing, you can do a clinical trial, not necessarily with patients being in a clinical trial. You can do a clinical trial okay, so when I was on the sponsor side and we wanted to test new technologies and new algorithms, we will revise a clinical protocol ourselves, okay? So in order to know the collection of data, the gaps between the data, and how we're going to do imputation, and if we really want to put a medical device in a clinical trial, we would do a clinical trial ourselves. We will have someone within the pharma side, a medical expert and a biomarker strategist, write the clinical protocol, and then we will adhere to that clinical protocol. And the protocol will say, for example, you can exercise for 3 days, and for 3 days you don't exercise, and you follow the protocol, you collect the data, and then you start doing the analysis of the data. And there you can see really the data collection. And if someone says, okay, I have an algorithm where I aggregate data and I can predict bouts, right? A series of steps, or I can predict sleep, we can see there the data collection, if it is accurate, and the gaps and all of that prior to putting a medical device into a clinical trial. In the same concept, we should be able to collaborate proactively with startups or other organizations prior to putting something on a clinical trial.
For sure. That's really, really helpful for kind of sharing a little bit more about that framework. One of the things too that we have from the audience member wanted to know if you, as you kind of are thinking through the standards and the process, if you're also looking to include voice analytics like conversational behavior intelligence or vocal biomarker intelligence.
Voice analytics are very important. Even in the situation where we want efficiencies, right? Within an organization utilizing generative AI, we look how important is voice analytics. So There is the creation of different dashboards through the collection of data that can be segmented by channels, different channels. It can be voice, it can be chat, it can be email, and have different user types and different agent metrics, measuring the augmentation impact and ongoing quality checks. So these are very important to me, yes. And when we do things like that, so for example, when we look at agentic AI, right, using voice to text and be able to have voice analytics, we have different KPI metrics that we want to take into consideration. Some of them have to deal with security, compliance, and ethical KPIs, such as we can have the toxicity detection accuracy, right? The percentage of inappropriate interactions caught by different filters. We can have a prompt injection detection rate where you can see successful or blocked prompt attacks. We look for audit trail completeness. We look for model drift detection. And that's why sometimes I speak about following the data even post-market, because sometimes the data collection and the algorithms perform very well in a patient population, but then more you increase the data and more you follow the patients post-market, then we see that we have drifting of the models, right? So how often performance degradation is detected and retrained. So in these kind of situations, we have requirements for trust and compliance. And we always recommend monthly reviews regarding model drift detection, etc.
That's super helpful. I know we only have a minute, which is crazy. And I know that there's so many, questions and a lot of excitement. One of the questions that we actually have from our audience member is if you're hiring. So if people would like to get in touch with you, learn more, get involved, how should they contact you or contact Kate?
How they can contact Kate? This is a very good question. Actually, they can send currently. I have an email for Kate. I don't have it ready up front, but they can contact me via LinkedIn. They can also contact Stan Kaknowski. I think everybody should have the email of Stan, and they should be getting involved currently within Kate from the different paths of life. We are looking for data scientists, for data engineers, from the sponsor side, from the startup side, from the regulatory and payer side. Is a collective approach to be able to provide ethical, robust, validated AI that serves all the populations and not only some.
That is phenomenal. And also wanted to thank Pallavi and HitLab for including the email for Stan and Chrysanthi's LinkedIn in the chat. So make sure that if you do have any further questions, want to get involved, want to learn more, that you have some places to go for that. Thank you so much, Chrysanthi. We are right at time. What an incredible conversation. I feel like I have learned a ton. I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with us today.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chrysanthi. Make sure that you join us next week for our next Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. Wanted to thank our sponsor for sponsoring this incredible conversation, as well as one last huge thank you to our incredible guest, Chrysanthi. And we will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.